Hey, Beavis, pull my finger. Your finger.
Shut up, butthead.
Oh my.
I gave her the finger.
Oh man, I kind of forgot about how much of an idiot those guys were. Welcome to Flynndogg Woodwork. When I first started woodworking, I was kind of an idiot too, and that's what we're going to talk about today. I've got dozens of items that I wish I would have known when I first started woodworking, so let's get started. So if you're just starting out in woodworking, you may have a lot of questions, and that's what this video is all about. So one of the first things that I used to do when I completed a project and presented it to somebody like my wife was to point out all the flaws and mistakes that I made in that project. And this is totally absurd, as most people can't even build the project you made, let alone be able to tell the flaws. So take some pride in what you made, knowing that nobody's going to notice those mistakes other than yourself. So if you're like me, you've probably struggled with trying to figure out what your next project should be. Some projects may feel intimidating while others dull and boring. But if you want to grow as a woodworker, pick a project that will incorporate a couple of skills that you've never tried before. Maybe it's a half-lap joint, or some dovetails, or a simple miter. Because I guarantee you, if you try this, you'll impress yourself and you'll have another skill in your toolbox. Are you apprehensive about even starting to woodwork? Well, there's a great place to start. When you first start out, you may have a shop that looks like this, with just a few tables to rest your tools on. Building shop furniture is an excellent way to get comfortable with using your tools, as well as to learn how to work with different materials. Not to mention, most of your furniture will probably be made with things like 2x4, so you're not going to break the bank if you make a mistake. One thing that really surprised me when I first started woodworking was that I was consistently making two repetitive components. Don't know what these two items are? Well, it's the box and panel. If you can make a wooden box or a wooden panel, you can make an unlimited number of woodworking projects. If you look at your house, you'll notice that most of your furniture is just a bunch of boxes. And those boxes are just made up of panels. And a great way to start off for learning how to glue up panels is making a simple cutting board. Have you ever been in your shop and you can't figure out what to do next, or you're stuck on a particular part of a project? This happens to me occasionally, and I consider it a woodworker's form of writer's block. If this happens to me and I find myself putzing around the shop only getting frustrated because I can't come up with a solution, I take a break. And this is one of my favorite pieces of advice. There's nothing worse than realizing that you wasted almost an entire afternoon in your shop with not a whole lot to show for it. So take a break when your wheels are spinning and come back when you're fresh and renewed. In a hurry to get a project done before that holiday deadline? Well, this can be a recipe for disaster. If there's anything I've learned over the years, whenever I'm in a hurry, I tend to make mistakes. And I'm not just talking about mistakes in my project, I'm talking about the potential for serious injury. One of the best pieces of advice that I got from watching Steve Ramsey was that you need to envision every single cut that you're going to make. This means envisioning where your arms, your hands, your fingers, and even your clothing will be before, during, and after each cut. And when you're in a hurry, intoxicated, or just flat out tired, we tend to forget this critical step. Sometimes it's the wood that matters more than the design. Wood is a beautiful material on its own, and sometimes simple is better. When I first started woodworking, I would try to overcomplicate a piece by adding unique design. But sometimes wood can have such beautiful color or figure that all these design elements can take away from its natural beauty. Know when a project's complete. As you all know, you can spend hours on a project thinking that you need to add just one more detail to make it a Picasso. But sometimes, after taking a little break from the project and getting out of the wood shop, you'll come back and realize that that project is beautiful as it is. You're going to save all sorts of money when you start making your own furniture. Well, the truth is, production furniture is a heck of a lot cheaper than anything you'll make. Because of the cheap material and economy of scales of these production companies, there's no way you'll be able to beat the price of a piece of furniture that you can get from IKEA. You'll be doing woodworking because you enjoy it, not to save money. If you were to look in my closet, you'd be hard-pressed to find a shirt or a pair of pants without dried wood glue or stain on it. When I first started woodworking, I thought that woodworking aprons were only to hold your tools and protect you from flying pieces of wood. But a nice woodworking apron can save you hundreds of dollars by protecting your entire wardrobe. You're a woodworker now, so you have all the tools you need to fix everything for your friends. Woodworking is time consuming. Know what you're getting into before you agree to do any projects for friends and family. Because once you agree to do a project for a friend, it gets prioritized over every single other project that you want to do. And that's why it's okay to say no to friends and family. In fact, no is a complete sentence. You're a woodworker, can I borrow your miter saw? If you're like me, your tools are your babies, and nobody's going to treat them as nicely as you do. And lending out essential tools like a miter saw or a table saw is going to completely shut down production in your shop. And even little tools like a jigsaw can cause problems. As soon as you lend out that tool, you're going to be working on something where you need that tool. So if you do lend something out, make sure it has a firm return date. It's never too early to start working with hardwoods. When I first started woodworking, one of my first projects was building a cutting board out of hardwoods, and this single-handedly ratcheted up my desire to continue woodworking. It was my first time using a clear finish, and seeing those hardwood colors pop once you apply that finish is something that you'll never get tired of throughout your entire woodworking journey. There's no such thing as scrap, especially when you're using a hardwood. Unless you're a home builder for mice, this just isn't true. Scraps take up a lot of valuable real estate in your shop. Come up with a minimal size that you think might be usable on future projects. For me, it's about a piece that's 12 inches long by 4 inches wide. And if you have a hard time throwing that wood away, remember most of your firewood is made out of hardwood. There's always more than one solution to a problem. This is probably one of my favorite parts of woodworking. Woodworking's like a giant puzzle. The more skills you learn, the more solutions you learn to problems that may have stumped you in the past. This flexibility allows you to be as creative or as simple as you want. Whether using things like pocket holes, mortise and tenons, dominoes, or even dovetails, there's a solution for every problem. Moisture is the enemy of all metal tools, especially your table saw. Now this is one of the main reasons why I'm working out of my garage right now, as I'm currently getting my shop remodeled so that it's climate controlled and humidity controlled. But it's not just the humidity that can rust up things like your table saw. It's a drop of sweat or the condensation from a cold beverage. So think about where you're storing your tools and if there's anything that needs to be done to protect those tools from things like humidity, condensation, and sweat. When you first purchase tools, the blades that come with those tools are essentially crap. Even fancy tools like a saw stop come with subpar blades to those that you can get at a big box store. So if you're still rocking the blade that came with your miter saw or your table saw, do me a favor and go to the big box store and get a replacement blade. You'll be amazed at how much better it cuts. Find a local sawmill or lumber yard that's not a big box store. Here in Indiana, the only hardwoods that are available at these big box stores are oak and poplar. But if you make a trip to just outside the city, you're more than likely to find a sawmill. And it's these sawmills that will not only have a wider variety of hardwoods, but they'll also have prices that can sometimes be less than half of what you see at the big box stores. Who needs dust collection? That's for the weak. I don't mind a little sawdust on the floor. Well, that's what I thought for probably my first year and a half of woodworking. But the dust collection is not for the floors, it's for our lungs. In fact, if you watched one of my recent videos, you'll know that dust collection is one of the items that I missed the most when I brought my shop up to this garage. And that's because after using dust collection for a period of time, you'll begin to realize how much dust is actually floating through the air. And a lot of times, once you get into working with hardwoods or exotics, that dust can be toxic to your system. So protect your lungs so you can be doing this hobby for as long as you can. For measuring and marking, 0.7mm mechanical pencils are where it's at. Now I've tried a variety of different woodworking marking tools throughout my career, and I keep coming back to this mechanical pencil. Now I've tried marking knives, and these can be great if you're doing a lot of hand tool work or doing something like creating dovetails. However, for me, the marking knife just isn't visible enough. And for a while in my career, I was getting into 0.5mm pencils. However, these are just too thin and they tend to break on you. especially if you're using intricate marking tools like this woodpecker's with the little notches. So in my opinion, keep it simple and stick with a standard 0.7mm mechanical pencil. Air compressors aren't necessary for every shop. Now I have a small air compressor in my shop, but since the development of these battery-powered nailers, I tend to use that air compressor less and less. In fact, I've only used that air compressor over the last 2 years to blow off sawdust once I'm done sanding a project. And frankly, nailers like these are a heck of a lot easier to use because you're not chasing down the hose that's attached to the nailer. So unless you already have a nailer that's air-powered, I don't think you need a compressor in your shop. Wood glue is stronger than you think. So strong, in fact, it's stronger than the wood you're gluing together. Don't believe me? Well, next time you glue a couple pieces of wood together, put it in a vise and see if you can break it with a hammer. What you'll find is that wood will break with the grain of the wood and not the seam of the glue. So have a little more faith in your glue ups and give some respect to that wood glue. If you just got a new set of chisels, you're probably pretty excited to use them. The problem is, chisels typically don't come sharp enough to start woodworking right out of the box. You're going to need to buy some stones, flatten the backs, and hone your chisels down so that you can have those sharp tools you wanted. And that's a whole process that I actually enjoy doing. However, I was unaware that these weren't up to snuff right out of the box. And the same is true with plane blades as well. I need Festool, I need woodpeckers, I need a saw stop. All great tools, but none of us start with the best. If you're like me, you learned a lot of what you know by watching woodworking videos on YouTube. However, YouTube is a marketplace. And that means that many tools that you see on popular woodworking channels are provided free to those creators. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, I've gotten a few free tools myself. However, I always disclose if I get a tool for free. But after having this channel for a little over a year, I know there's a lot of options out there. Many of the tools that you don't see on popular woodworking channels are just as good as some of those higher end brands. So whether it's Ryobi, Bosch, DeWalt, or even Festool, just know that many of these brands work entirely the same. Clean up your wood glue, especially if you're using pine. And if you're just starting out, there's a good chance that you are using pine. And then you're staining that pine to make it look like a higher quality wood. The problem is, wood glue is stain's enemy. And this is something that I learned the hard way when I first started out, as wood glue tends to seal the fibers of the wood and doesn't allow that stain to penetrate into those fibers. Therefore, if you're using a darker stain, you're left with blotchy wood or the color of the pine where you want it to be a darker color. And sanding doesn't always get rid of all that dried wood glue, so before that glue sets, make sure you get a damp rag and wipe everything down. Popping the grain is a real thing, especially if you're making something like a cutting board that's going to be in contact with water. So popping the grain is something that you do right before you go to apply your first coat of finish. This allows the wood to absorb that water and raise the grain a bit. Once those fibers have raised a bit from the water, it's time to knock those fibers down with a final sanding. And this is something that I just didn't do when I first started woodworking. And if you go back to some of my earlier cutting boards and you feel the grain, it actually feels like a 5 o'clock shadow. The nice thing about a table saw and a miter saw is they have the angles marked out so you can easily read them. The problem is they're usually not very accurate. These are tools that need to be calibrated as well as checked for calibration before each use. And I had no idea about this when I first started woodworking. A great investment for a beginner woodworker is something like a speed square or one of these angle finders. And if you use something like a speed square or an angle finder to figure out your measurements, you may find that your miter saw or your table saw reads differently. The hammer that you use for woodworking most likely isn't going to be a standard hammer. And that's because you're less likely to use a hammer like this to drive in nails and more likely to coerce a piece of wood into place by either using a rubber mallet or a wooden mallet. By using a metal hammer like this, there's a high likelihood that you'll scar up your workpiece and just cause more frustration. Tape measures are something that I lose in the shop all the time, and the solution for this for me was to buy as many of these as I can. Turns out this can actually cause some problems, as not all tape measures are built equally. You see, there can be a little bit of difference between each tape measure that you own, even if it's the same brand. And this little bit of difference can compound if you're going back and forth between two different types of tape measures. And that's why it's important to pick one tape measure and stick with it through the entire project. Well, that's going to do us for today. I know this was a little bit faster of a format than I typically do. If you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and leave a comment. It really does help out this small woodworking channel. Until next time, take care as always.